let's start off with what made you write this book? It seems a little bit odd that a neurosurgeon is writing a book about horses.
Well, I think in some ways it is, but I look at this as my neurosurgery world is sort of the left brain. It's sort of the analytic, the logical part of my life. And horses have always been a part of my life, and they sort of represent the emotional and the intuitive part of my brain. And together they really fit. And I think what was good about the book was I was able to take a lot of what I know about the brain and how it functions and translate that into why we feel so close and so connected with these animals.
You open the book with a very moving story about one of your cancer patients who gets into the arena with your stallion. Can you tell your readers about that experience?
Well, I open with it because I think it highlights some of the spiritual lessons and how horses seem to come along at the right time with the right things to teach us. This was a patient of mine who had a malignant brain tumor. She was told she didn't have long to live and that she was going to have to go through a course of very harrowing chemotherapy and radiation. And there was really a question in her mind about just giving up. And she made this request that she wanted to get into the round pen with our stallion. And I was alarmed because this was she had never requested going in with a horse. This was a stud. It was very difficult to handle, very powerful horse, a very dominant horse. And at first I just thought, no, this is not going to happen. But she really was begging to do this, and I finally relented, and she got into the round pen, and there was suddenly this interaction between this thundering horse and her sort of gradually asserting herself, and this stud just quieting down and eventually walking over and standing beside her at the center of the round pen. And when it was all over and I asked her what was going on, she said, I had to prove to myself that I could face up to this stallion. And she said, if I didn't do that, I wasn't going to have the strength to go on with the chemotherapy that people were going to ask of me. And this was my way of showing that I had the stamina. This was my way of proving to myself I had the strength to get myself through this. And I have to say, she lived for very many more months. And I was very touched that when she passed away, she asked for her ashes to be buried in our round pen. That was how important that single interaction with that stud was to her.
You talk a lot in the book about your new concept of the neuroequine model. Can you explain a little bit more to the readers about that and why it's so important?
I was interested in what do we get out of working with horses? Why is there such an immediate connection? When you look at a lot of the spiritual practices around the world, whether it be prayer, whether it be meditation, very often they're things that are close your eyes, chant a mantra, focus on your breathing. All of those things help us to go into more of a spiritual frame of mind. If you think about them, they're really all designed to cut out the voice that's inside your head, that constant chatter that you have. And that's all coming from the left hemisphere. Horses are nonverbal. They don't talk to us through our left hemisphere. They interact with us through our right hemisphere. So the neuroequine model says the reason that human beings and horses form these very tight, emotional, intuitive relationships is because they're talking right hemisphere to right hemisphere. Nonverbal communication, intuitive communication, energetic communication, and it bypasses all that nonsense that we get from that inner voice, that constant chatter in our head.
Zen Mind and Zen Horse is about the science and spirituality of working with horses. What should a reader expect to find in this book?
I think exactly that. I think one part of the book is talking about the science of why we relate to horses, and it talks about the science of why we can work more effectively with horses. I think the other part of this book, and in some ways the more important part of this book, is that this is a book about spirituality and taking spiritual lessons and principles and putting them to work in your practice, in your groundwork with a horse, and actually seeing if that principle works for you.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. We try to get peaceful in our lives. We try to bring more quiet. Our lives are tense enough. The internet and the emails and the cell phones going off and all the demands of modern life. Somewhere in that hectic schedule, we want to find a moment to meditate, to focus inwardly, and to quiet ourselves down. Well, in the book, there are exercises that allow you to actually practice that. And guess what? When you're practicing that with a horse, if the horse is moving at a certain gait and you're able to quiet yourself down, that horse will immediately slow its gait down. If you quiet yourself down further, that horse will start to come from the rail of the round pen towards the center to want to stand next to you. And the reason is, as you get quiet, your energy gets smaller and smaller and more inviting. And the horse is saying, wait a minute, there's all this peaceful energy at the center. I'm going there. So you literally have a gauge of how effectively you're quieting your inner self down.
Obviously, this book focuses on a horse, but what about someone who doesn't have a horse or have any experience? What's in it for them?
I wrote this book specifically with that person in mind, with the person who has no experience with horses or may even be frightened with horses. And those people have a unique advantage. They don't bring all that horsemanship baggage with them. They're just coming to the horse naked with their emotions, as it were. So those people are going to have a very easy time with these exercises. Let me give you an example. One of the exercises is just looking at a horse in a pasture. Now you'd say to yourself, well, what do you learn from that? Well, I show you in that book that you can actually pick that horse out. And when you pick that horse out in your mind and you look at that horse, guess what? That horse out of the whole herd will pick up its head and look at you. And you say, why? And that's because your intention, just thinking about that horse, sends out an energy that horse can pick up. For example, you can just lead the horse. In leading the horse, you learn a tremendous amount about what the energy signature of your own body really is, because the horse is picking up that energy field around you, and every one of us has a different energy field. It's like a fingerprint. So the horse is always coming up, and when it first greets you, it's trying to figure out what's your energy signature. So these are all lessons that anybody wants to learn. How to focus, how to be patient, how to live in the moment, how to clear their mind. And all of those things are extremely easy to teach on the ground, never getting up on the saddle, never having to ride a horse on the trail, but every one of them can be practiced with a horse on the ground.
What's new and different in Zen Mind, Zen Horse for the horse enthusiast?
I think for the horse enthusiast, probably one of the most important unique things about this book is it's using a brand new methodology for training horses that's based on qi, this concept of vital energy, that you are sharing and moving and trading with the horse constantly. So all of the lessons and all of the training exercises are based on that. There's a second paradigm that's introduced there that we call ARDP, which stands for Ask, Request, Demand, and Promise. And it sort of gives the trainer a very safe, humane, respectful, stepwise progression to follow with the horse that guarantees that the trainer is never asking the horse to do something that he can't succeed at. And I think that's key. And then I think another important concept is that in terms of using the round pen, we incorporate the notion borrowed from the Native American cultures of the 4 directions, and each one representing a different key concept. Empathy in the north, illumination and learning in the east, intention in the south, and then wisdom and legacy in the west. And trying to create a balance of those forces in the round pen when you're working with a horse.
You talk a lot about grooming in the book. What's so important about it? Because most of us would think that's just a routine chore.
Yeah, I actually devote 2 chapters in the book to grooming. And the reason is I sort of look at grooming the way you would a Japanese tea ceremony. I mean, you can just pour a cup of tea out and drink it, or you can actually look at the ritual and everything that it signifies. Grooming is our way of ritually greeting our horse every day, of reconnecting with our horse. And it needs to be done with attention, it needs to be done with focus, and we need to be transmitting to the horse our love and our respect for that horse. So it's not something we should take casually. It's something that we really should look at every single detail and infuse it with the importance of tradition and ritual. I think that grooming has this aspect of almost a Japanese ritual, very much like Bushido, of carrying out ceremonies to show that you are of service, that you're submitting yourself totally to the service of your horse. And this is the one opportunity that you have to really express that, not just physically, but also cognitively for ourselves in terms of focusing on it while we're doing it, not taking it for granted. It's not a chore. It's a ceremony.
Monty Roberts and Dr. Robert Miller, both who were giants in the horse industry, wrote forwards to your book. Tell us how that came about.
Well, it's a little unusual to have 2 forwards, but when you have 2 people of this stature who come forward and say, I want to write a forward to the book, we just really felt like we should put both of them in there. Bob Miller and I have been friends for a very long time and corresponded over years. I've always used his foal imprinting techniques for all of my foals. So he had one of the great key concepts in imprinting. And then Monty had this enormous contribution of defining the language of horses, equus, through his work. So these are sort of 2 gods in the worlds of horsemanship, and they sort of represent 2 different aspects, almost a yin and yang. So we felt like they complemented each other, and these are great human beings. They both read the book and said, we'd like to write a foreword to it, and I couldn't be more honored and more happy to have both of them on the book.
If you had one wish for the reader who picked up this book, what would it be?
This book is filled with different spiritual lessons and principles. On different days, at different moments in our lives, there are some things that we need, that we're asking a question about, or that would help us in our lives. Take this book, forget about the rest of the world, go through the book and find the spiritual lesson or the spiritual question that you have, and go to work for 10 or 20 minutes with your horse in the round pen. And that horse will give you the answer. It will always give you the answer. When you're ready with the question, that horse is going to say, now they're ready. Now I'll give them the answer.